So begins a dance through time, a complex interplay to baffle the mind. She lives a scheme he has yet to invent. He knows her from places she's yet been sent. In Dark Age Gwyneth, the chosen gather, under the guidance of a great master, and those who are awoken by her will alter the course of the ancient future.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you about The Ancient Future, which I think is probably my fan favorite book. It's also the first book I ever wrote and the book that got me published. And this is the little darling here. This is the very first edition of The Ancient Future and probably the most beloved. It's had several different incarnations since 1996 when it was first published by HarperCollins Voyager Australia. Actually, no, it was just HarperCollins at that time. It's before Voyager had even become a thing. It was before, fantasy, sci-fi genre had even become a thing. I didn't even know what I was writing at the time. I was just writing a book that interested me. And basically, it got classified as fantasy because I had a martial artist from the present day, a woman named Tori Alexander, transported back to the Dark Ages from a sacred ring of stones during the night of the summer solstice, and she ended back in Dark Age Wales with Melvyn Gwyneth and his band of knights, and they had some amazing adventures and altered history, and it began a huge story that I thought, actually, at the time when I first wrote it, I thought it was going to be a short story, and it's actually spawned 13 books since then, that have just gone from one end of time to the other. They've gone intergalactic, into other universes, dimensions, realities. My characters will go absolutely anywhere. But today we're just starting with The Ancient Future. And it had a reincarnation in 1996 when it was, 1996 it was published. I think it was 2006 that it got rejacketed. And that wasn't hugely popular with the fans, actually. They liked the original cover. And then in 2014, it was released as an omnibus, like the first trilogy all in one book, which was the biggest, fattest thing ever put on a shelf. Here we go. There it is. It was quite sizable. And this actually is still available through my store. I think you can get it through other stores, but they'd probably have to order it in because it was kind of a limited edition kind of thing because of how much it costs to produce. If you need a nice weighty doorstop, that's there. So, and it was released as an audiobook also, and it was also released in complex Chinese and released worldwide in Mandarin. Mandarin. Um, to be, read by anyone who can speak or read complex Chinese. So and it was released on audio by BOLINDA Audio, so it's also available that way. So I was working at a film studio in North Sydney, and we had a South African producer working out of the studio, and we were talking about, possibly, you know, she wanted me to write a film, and she said, "Oh, I love anything with martial arts," because I think she'd just come off Time Cop with Van Damme, and she'd also done King Solomon's Mines, and she was saying that martial arts were incredibly popular. Could we write something that had martial arts in it? And I'd just seen Time Cop as well, and I just love that whole idea of moving through time. Time really interested me. I'd also recently, before that, read a book called The Education of Oversoul 7 that had four different people in four different periods of time, all being overseen by an oversoul, and how their timelines were all crossing over. Like the girl that was in the past would draw something on a rock, and a guy that was exploring the ruins in the future would turn around and see a symbol that wasn't there a second ago, simultaneous time, which really interested me. And so I came up with this idea of a martial artist kind of plummeted back through time, um, dealing with the knights and stuff back there, and having this amazing fighting skill that they'd never seen before. And then I thought, okay, well, what if we make it a woman? Because that will make it super interesting. And so Tori Alexander was born. And the rest is history, I think. So that's where the idea actually came from, and I built on it over a large period of time. I actually did go over to England. We were doing a recce looking for locations for a film script that I'd written called Chairs, which was then released as The Immortal Bind as a book just recently, a couple of years ago. So that took a long time to come to fruition. We never got it off the ground as a film. It was really hard back in the 80s, especially if you've got an imagination like mine, which is huge, huge budget. And, you know, the budgets here are so tiny, tiny. And so if you couldn't get a big international interested in your work, then there was no way that you were going to get something as mammoth as one of my scripts up, and certainly not The Ancient Future. But I'd been there, and we'd been to a stone circle over there. Um, I think one of my reader questions, because I'm going to do a reader Q&A on this book in another video, but one of the questions was, did you go to England and did you see Stonehenge before you wrote about it? Well, I actually did, and Stonehenge to me, I didn't feel anything there. Actually, if anything, I felt repelled from there because it was like watching a caged animal. That's the only way I can explain it. I didn't really feel the magic of Stonehenge at all. But this book, like if anybody's got to the Cosmic Logos, where actually I come into my own story, I'm talking about the book that falls off the shelf and, you know, triggers the idea. And this is it. Places of Power by Paul Devereux. Absolutely amazing. And when we were in England, we were using this as a guide, and we found this tiny little stone circle called the Dole Circle, which was down, I think, in Devon, Cornwall, somewhere down there. So hard to find. It was not like Stonehenge where people drive up in buses and it's all curtained off and you can't get anywhere near it. These stones were up the back of a farmyard. We had to climb over a fence into somebody's paddock. It was all misty. We couldn't see a damn thing. Not in front of us, not even a couple of feet. But then the mist cleared, and here was this stone circle just sitting in the middle of nowhere, no one there, and all these stones were like uncut quartz crystal, huge chunks of it. So standing in its presence for any amount of time, you were just literally shaking like this. It was like you could feel the energies just pumping through that place. And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is a wonderful way for my character to get taken back in time, because they're so magical, especially when you go and you visit the more out of the way rings of stones that you never hear about. But really, that and a lot of other research about Melbourne, Melbourne, that I'll get to in a minute. I'm hopeless at Welsh pronunciation, so forgive me. But I can spell all the names really well, thank God, and thank God that Edwina Wren was so good at pronouncing Welsh names when she did all the audios, because I was a bit clueless. Which, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? But I did a lot of research. I mean, seriously, I researched these books to death. And some things I just got intuitively. It was really, really odd. Like I'd be researching something, say, for example, I put Talison's otherworldly abode, the entrance to it, at Llyn Bach on Anglesey. because it was the last stand of the Druids against the Romans, and I thought that would be a beautiful place for him to have had his hideout. And then sometime, I created this whole temple with an altar stone and these statues of the goddess that had been erected around this altar stone. And then sometime later, I'm reading an article about them pulling these statues of the goddess out of the ground there. So that was pretty amazing. And there was originally an altar stone in that spot way, way back, because waterways were considered sacred, and there was lots of forest there back in the day. Because I was really worried, because I pictured a big forest at this place and all these trees. And you go and you look now, and it's kind of near an airport. Everything's been flattened. There's nothing there. And I was a bit concerned when I was researching for the last book, This Present Past, that I'd got it wrong. But then going and reading a Roman account of Anglesey, they said it was tree lined from one end to the other, to the other, to the other. It's all been taken down since then. So it's interesting. You get in. I got lots of intuitive hunches about that period and those people. Another one that was actually, no, I'll save that for This Present Past, because it really had to do with that. But yeah, I think that's when you know as a writer that you're on the right track, when you get those funny little coincidences that happen when you're researching. So some of the other books that I lent on very heavily when I was researching, I thought you might be interested to take a bit of a look. I mean, I've got the old classics that supposedly, tell you all about Melbourne and what a tyrant he was, which was like Geoffrey of Monmouth, which was actually written, I don't know, about 400 years later. Um, the same with Nemesis. But this one had the genealogy in it, and I mean these are the books that most of your scholars will be going off when they're talking about Melbourne. But because he was of the pagan faith and he was a bit of a scoundrel, of course he's not going to get a very good write up from men that were very chaste and very, I think, Catholic holy, and writing after the fact and not really leaving their monasteries and knowing what the hell is going on. This book I also leaned on very heavily, which was Arthur's Britain by Leslie Alcock. Fantastic book. These two, John and Catelyn Matthews, oh my goodness, how amazing are these guys? I leaned very heavily on these books. And another one that was really good for the history was The Age of Arthur by John Morris. If you are looking into Dark Age Britain at all, this is a really good book, quite thick as you can see, but an excellent reference book for all the lineages in Britain at that time. Also, Murray Hope, Practical Celtic Magic. I lent on a lot of her books when I was writing the first trilogy, because she's written books about Atlantis and so forth as well, which I'll show you when I do the video for the next book. But Murray Hope, just fantastic, really, really good. And she also did a book called Time, the Ultimate Energy, which was really helpful when I was doing all the time travel stuff. So yeah, really fantastic. I hope you can still get them, because I did buy them quite some time ago. But as you can see, I've got quite a massive library that I kind of, borrow from quite a bit and lean on quite a bit. So that's a lot of the research I did. I mean, I was so interested in so many things at that time. I had a group of girls that I used to hang out with, and we were all kind of into different things, but we got lots of information, like somebody might be into crystals, or somebody might be into herbal essences at that time, or Somebody was into time travel, somebody was into conspiracy theory, and we'd all just swap information. We'd get together like once a month with lots of tea and chocolates and cigarettes, probably. And we just discuss things, and I'd get lots of ideas. I knew quite a few psychics. My mum did parapsychology for a while. So I had a lot of interesting influences to borrow from when I was doing these books. And thank goodness, because I think that's what made them unique and interesting. So, some of the major themes that were underlying this story were things like, well, time travel, obviously. I was very interested in that. Ley lines, which I also got a lot of interest in information from the Paul Devereux books, because that's a lot of that he was tracking those. They had a lot of scientific equipment down at these stones, kind of tracking where these energies within the stones were running off to in different directions, so that they could track the ley lines. And so ley lines became a real thing of interest for me, and all the phenomena that actually happened around ley lines as well. Um, Creating your own reality became a really, really big theme throughout all my books. And it was something I personally believed in, because I had proven it to myself that we do create our own reality. And this was before quantum physics had really cottoned onto it. And so when I watched What the Bleep Do We Know, I was just bawling. I think that came out, oh God, maybe 10 years after I'd written my first book. But I was absolutely bawling that science was starting to back up what I'd known all along, is that our mental state has a huge effect on everything that happens to us. And inside every fear is a secret wish. Um, so as far as creating your own reality goes, it did become a very deep-seated um, part of my books, even though like the reviews said that I was crazy, my ideology was out the window. It just goes to show, don't listen to anybody else. Stick to your own guns, because I knew I was right, because I'd proven it to myself. And I mean, it is very easy to prove that you create your own reality. You want a glass of water, you go get a glass of water. That's creating your own reality right there. And anything else you want to do is really just as simple as that. It might take a little bit longer, because we are down here on this physical plane of existence. If we were living up in the fifth dimension, I'm sure it would be like much more snappy. But I have attracted so many amazing things into my life simply by focusing on it, and not focusing on it like, oh my God, I don't think it'll happen if I'm not focusing on it every second. No, it's those off the cuff kind of, gee, it'd be nice if that happened. And those are the things that really tend to come about. Even me being a writer, what were the chances? Seriously, I got a D in English. I left school in fourth form. I'm dyslexic and I can't spell. So, what were the chances of me becoming a writer? Seriously. But none of that really mattered in the end, because I had this huge imagination. And that is what got me a publishing deal. And with this book, um, there's a whole story behind how I got published. And it is that when I was actually writing the book, my girlfriends used to all come around, and I'd read installments to them, and they were loving it. And they sort of said to me, they said, what are you going to do with it when you're finished? And I said, well, I don't know. I just feel like the right person will come along when I'm done. And they said, well, who would you like to publish it? And I turned around and I looked at all my research books, and a lot of them were HarperCollins. And I said, well, HarperCollins would be good because, I've used a lot of their books as research, and, a lot of the quotes and stuff that I've used, that would make, getting rights and stuff a lot easier. And when I'd actually finished writing the book, I printed out copies for my family for Christmas. I had a friend, my editor was working somewhere that they had a big collating machine, so we printed off a whole lot of copies, and I gave one to everyone for Christmas. And my mum read it. She loved it. She had a friend, Lynn Rainbow, who is one of my fairy godmothers, um, and she was an actress, and she read it and she loved it. And she had a writer friend, David Sale, because she used to be in Number 96, and David Sale used to write for Number 96. And she said to me, she said, "Oh, can I pass this on to my friend's agent?" I didn't even know who the agent was. I just said, "Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Linny." And the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from Selwa Anthony. Now, I didn't even know who Selwa was. I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't know anything about literary agents. I had a friend who was in publishing who asked me, who the book had been sent to. I said, "Oh, it's been sent to Selwa Anthony." And he's going, "Oh my God, she's like the biggest agent you could possibly land, in this country." And so that made me really nervous. But I got this phone call from Selwa. It was the night of my 13th wedding anniversary, and I was just about to go out to dinner. And she said to me, she said, "Well, look, I've just read part 1 of your book." She said, "If part 2 and 3 are as good, you've got yourself an agent," which was very exciting. And so she started sending it out to publishers. And we went for a couple first off, I think. And I got a couple of rejection notices from people that had, bought something that was similar recently. And so, because it was a Celtic thing, and the whole interesting Celtic culture was really huge at that time. And when she had sent me a note saying that she'd sent it off to HarperCollins, I highlighted HarperCollins and I stuck it on my pinboard, and I just waited for them to get back to me. And I got not a rejection, I just got "We'd like to talk to you about your manuscript." And I thought, "Oh my God, okay." So I went in and I saw the publishers, and I was handed a piece of paper of what I had to do, and had 2 things written on it. One was cut 60,000 words, because it was quite long. I mean, it still is quite long, but it was longer then. And Tori is too perfect. And it was like, oh, okay. So if I am, change those things up, I'm going to be published. They went, "Oh, yes, absolutely." And so that was it. My editor and I sat down and cut 60,000 words. Tori was a bit perfect, but that's the whole point of Tori. She's there to kind of lead the way for all the other characters. Like, her behavior and everything was kind of like, her moral code cannot be shifted. And I think there's not enough of that in in fiction, especially sci-fi fantasy. Everybody does really bad things, and then they justify it because somebody killed their friend or what have you. Well, no, her moral code was like, "No, we don't kill. We find a better way to do things." And I had someone say to me once, "That's the interesting thing about your books, is it's not about good versus evil. It's about the self versus the self," which I really liked, and that I believe is very true. So why Taliesin and Melvin Gwynedd? Well, I mean, I wanted my lead character to go back to the Dark Ages. And I really didn't want to do the whole Arthur Camelot thing because I'm not entirely convinced, actually, I'm fairly sure that Arthur never existed in the form that he is. I mean, a lot of that was created by French romantic writers during the 17th century, and the story's just sort of been embellished on over the years. But really, if Arthur existed, I believe he was probably Welsh. The story is something straight out of the Mabinogi. Um, Taliesin certainly is out of the Mabinogi, and he was the one that was really associated with Arthur in the legends, not Murden. Murden was kind of uh, more Rune's time, which is Melwyn's son, and even then he was kind of he was a northern druid, um, sort of more up towards Scotland. So when I was looking and I came across Taliesin, I just went, oh my god, why have there not been a billion stories written about this bard, this druid? Because he was amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. And if anyone was going to have the know how to bring somebody back through time, it was going to be him. And he was associated with Melbourne. So that's how that happened. As far as the other characters, they were all created or researched or, came out of my own imagination. Um, and based on kind of people I know. I'll talk about characters and getting into character more in the writing tutorials, but these characters became very clear to me. I mean, like Brockwell, who is an absolute favorite, was based on my brother. He had my my brother's mannerisms because in Tori's life, Brockwell was her brother Brian back in the future. And so that kind of made it very easy for me because I could relate to Brockwell as a brother kind of character. And I mean, that's a great thing to do when you're writing characters, to actually base them on people you know or on an actor that you've seen, or and then you've got a very good idea of how they act, what they sound like, what their preferences might be, and it just makes it much easier to create um, realistic scenarios, and you start to get a feel for what they will and won't like, and what they will and won't say. But I will go into that in another video. I'm going to do one about actually getting into character and give you a whole lot of questions about what to ask. But back on track for this story, that's how I landed on this particular group of characters, how I ended up in Wales and in Gwynedd, because it was just, oh, and such a beautiful place, such a magical place to base my story around. And I've had quite a few readers now that have gone over to Wales and gone and seen all the sites. I had someone bring me back a crystal that was actually taken from the dungeons in Deganwy. It was growing out of the walls. So it was very, very exciting that I've actually, got a bit of tourism going for Wales there, because I think quite often, I think a lot has been stolen from the Welsh culture, not only their language, but their stories. And I wanted to kind of firmly plant Arthur back where I think he belongs, and that is in Wales. And his name probably wasn't Arthur. I go into that in This Present Past, which is my most recent book, which is the prequel to The Ancient Future. So if you want to read my view of who Arthur actually was, then you can take a look at that book, although most of you probably have already. But yeah, so that's where I got the characters from. So a question I get asked a lot is, when is The Ancient Future going to be made into a TV series or a film? Well, the truth is, how long is a piece of string? Um, what you have to understand is that writers don't actually get a choice. We don't get to just say, oh, I'd like my books made into a film now, please. We have to wait for an interested producer to come along. And not only that, they have to be a producer with a lot of clout, because it takes quite a bit to get a film up and running. So there has been interest over the years. Many people have tried. The Ancient Future is a very huge project, and you need to understand that there's always people behind the scenes trying to make this happen. Because yes, I have had a lot of interest. There is interest at the moment. We're working on it as hard as we can, but getting the financing for something this huge, it's like Game of Thrones. It's just massive. So, I have to be patient. You guys have to be patient. But fortunately, it was made into an audiobook, and thankfully, Belinda have kindly allowed me to put an excerpt from the audiobook on the end of this video, so you can get a bit of a taste of what the book is like if you don't know it, or if you haven't heard the audio recording, then you can have a listen to that. And I've put some images over it to keep it interesting. It's just a short one, but it'll give you a little bit of an intro. It's beautifully narrated by Edwina Wren, who does a lot of the books from this series. Every time I could get her, I did, and people complained when I couldn't. But here you go. Here's an excerpt from The Ancient Future on audio from Belinda Audio, narrated by Edwina Wren.
As she stood to face the circle again, she thought of all the celebrations that would be taking place tonight at the more public sacred sites, like Glastonbury and Stonehenge. People would be performing old rites, dancing, singing and paying homage to the goddess, that is, Mother Earth. Oddly enough, the atmosphere surrounding the stones no longer perturbed her. On the contrary, it seemed to welcome, even beckon her towards the centre. So she ventured into the middle, dragging her belongings along with her. Close enough. Tori dropped her things where she stood and took off her boots. The potent energy of the place intrigued her, so she sat on the ground in the lotus position. The back of her hands rested gently on her knees, and her thumb and middle finger met to form a circle, aiding the circulation of energy around her body. She closed her eyes and took 3 deep breaths to achieve a relaxed, peaceful state. Her attention was drawn to the sounds of little night creatures. She inhaled progressively deeper, focusing her thoughts on the hooting of an owl close by. Tori had become so engrossed with this sound that she did not notice the light around her growing steadily more intense. This often happened when she meditated. Colours would emerge in her mind, intense colour at times, but never before had the light been so white for so long. She continued to breathe deeply, imagining that she was inhaling the brilliant white light throughout her body, and it filled her with a sense of strength and well-being. The owl stopped hooting, and Tori became aware of a faint humming, like the buzzing in your ears after a rock concert, only this was more melodic. It gradually increased in volume to the point where it bothered her and she was compelled to open her eyes. The white light she thought she had imagined truly surrounded her and appeared to be exuding from the ground within the circle. The mist rose towards the sky to form a large billowing cloud. From within the largest stone, a ball of blue light, no bigger than a coin, made its way towards her. What is it? A fairy, perhaps? She'd never actually seen one, so she couldn't dispel the possibility. In her study of these stones, Tori recalled that scientists had documented sightings of this light phenomena. Some said it was caused by geological and electromagnetic factors, but the energy involved was so exotic that it was not yet understood. Others suggested that it could relate to consciousness itself, considering consciousness as a field effect, like actually seeing the equivalent of what the Chinese refer to as qi energy. The sound of laughter then began to filter through Tori's head, and it sounded suspiciously male. This irked her, and she looked around for its source. "Is this some kind of elaborate hoax?" she asked. The laughter rose again, only clearer now. Tori drew herself up straight. "Show yourself. I'm not afraid." The light was still for a moment. Then in the blink of an eye it darted towards her, almost touching her forehead. Tori's limbs froze, and she began to feel faint as the light penetrated her skin.
So I hope you enjoyed that little sneak peek. Thank you to Belinda Audio for letting me do that, and they're going to let me do that for all these videos, which is very nice of them. If you would like to buy a copy of the book, there's links below. If you'd like an audio, if you'd like a mentoring session with me, all the links are below and a lot. There is also links to some of the books that I mentioned earlier on, the research books, down below. I've affiliated with Fish Pond, and there'll be more affiliations coming up. So anytime you click on one of those links and purchase something, then you're helping to keep this channel going. What else? Oh, the reader Q&A for The Ancient Future will be posted up in a couple of weeks, because I'm trying to sort of release a video every week, and sort of maybe one about the books one week and mentoring one the following week, and so on and so forth. So that's the way it's going to run. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure being here. I hope you enjoyed this insight into the ancient future, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. Oh, like, share, and subscribe, please. That would help me keep doing this. Thank you so much.